Showing on this episode of Law Weekly, another perspective on the poor funding and the corruption index of the judiciary. We have the views of a senior advocate of Nigeria, Yusuf Ali. Also showing on the program, lawyers assess the performance of the judiciary as the year winds down, plus our weekly recap of the news from the courts and the judicial panels of inquiry into SARS abuse and police brutality. Compliments of the season, everyone, and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Shola Shieli. Last month, the National Judicial Council, during a budget defense session, appealed to the legislature and the executive to increase the funding for the judiciary in line with the realities of the times. Last week on the show, I brought you the perspective of a former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Olisa Agbakoba SAN, on the poor funding of the judiciary. This week, I bring you the views of another renowned and respected legal practitioner who has practiced law for over 3 decades. A former chairman of the Judiciary Committee of the Nigerian Bar, former member of the Legal Practitioners Disciplinary Committee, life member of the Body of Benchers, Yusuf Ali has held and still holds many professional offices, and his views are much sought after on national issues. In this interview, I began with his views on the poor funding of the judiciary.
There must be willingness on the part of the people in the executive and legislature that a strong, viable, functional judiciary is at the root cause of development. Is at the root of development. Any form of development. So we want foreign direct investment. We want people to bring their money to their country to invest. Anybody who wants to bring his money to invest anywhere wants to be sure that there is a judicial process that will ensure that, because dispute is inevitable in commercial transactions, they want a system that will deliver in good time and quality of what should be delivered, comparable to anywhere. In terms of manpower, our judiciary has the best crop of judges we could find anywhere in the world. But they need the enabling environment to function and function properly well. We are talking about virtual. Even the digitalization of the court, as we said, is more than overdue. Some of us pride ourselves once, asking for the judiciary to be properly funded. I don't see any reason why all the entitlements of the judiciary in terms of overhead, cost, and capital projects could not be released to the judiciary at the beginning of the implementation of the budget. But Nigeria is what it is because, and I always tell people, of the 3 arms of government, judiciary has the highest number of well-read people in the system. Judiciary is the only arm where to become a high court judge, you must have been qualified to be a lawyer. You must have qualified as a lawyer for more than 10 years. Other arms, evidence of attendance in secondary school is what you require. So I don't know why the people in the executive and legislature believe that in spite of the high caliber of education required to be a member of the judiciary, they are better equipped to manage resources. So it's an appeal that we appeal to them, and we can't be paying lip service to the rule of law. It must be rule of law, and all of us we've seen now, both the high, we used to say judiciary is the last hope of common man. No, both the high and the low, judiciary is the last hope of everybody, because without the judiciary, there will be anarchy and chaos. So there will be no space to rule. So it's in our interest that we must fund the judiciary properly, so that they can deliver first-class 21st century service to the nation.
Last week on this show, I had a former president of the Nigerian Bar, Olisa Agbakoba, also on this issue of inadequate funding, and he put the blame squarely at the doorstep of the NJC. He's gone to court on their behalf, and he says that there's a judgment which they are not implementing. Do you agree?
I think it's a yes and no. The judiciary cannot sign the release warrants. You can say anything you want, because we have to be practical about these issues. The judiciary does not control the purse. They don't know what is in the federation account. It's the executive. And even when your budget is processed and your approval is given for payment, there must be warrant for release of money. So I think to a certain level, yes, you can say judiciary has some weapons they can use to force the hands of the people in the executive to do that which is right. Such as, for example, And all government cases, I bet they also even say that one, you may say it may become unconstitutional. When people say, well, all matters that has to do with government, we will not touch it until they release our money. Don't forget that some of these cases involve individuals and government. Some of these cases involve non-human beings in terms of companies and others run by Nigerians. So we can only continue to appeal to the executive that they should abide by the oath of offices they took with the Constitution, that they will abide with the provisions of the Constitution. So it's a constitutional requirement that judiciary must be properly funded. It's a constitutional requirement that the funds of judiciary is a first-line charge on the account of the Federation. They must make it to work. There must be the willingness for it to work, because yes, there is the judgment there. The judgment is not self-executory as it were. We need human elements to make the judgment talk the language which the court has pronounced.
Closely tied to the issue of funding is that of salaries of judges. From my findings, the last time that the salaries of judges was increased was in 2008. That's about 12 years ago. And yet we want a judiciary that we can be proud of, one that dispenses justice without fear or favor.
You expect a man to sit over multi-billion naira cases and you pay him pay notes. We really must be very serious about what we're doing. In England, where we copied, where we borrowed the common law, judges are better paid than the Prime Minister. And it was like this in this country until the military came. The salary of the Chief Justice of Nigeria was higher than that of Tafawa Balewa. But the distortions came because the soldiers came, and they think that once they were in government, they are next to God. And this changed all our systems negatively. But we've been in democracy now for more than 20 years. We should go back to the brass tacks and get it right. The judiciary, you expect them to settle electoral disputes, including that of the highest office of the country. And you believe that judges can just be paid just anything, just to survive. We must be prepared to fund the judiciary properly in terms of personnel cost, capital project costs, and others. Otherwise, you can't continue this way. And without the judiciary, there will be no democracy, there will be no rule of law, there will be no country. That's the truth. Because people now take the laws into their own hands and ventilate their grievances the way they want. The fact that courts exist is a restraining force on a lot of people from taking the laws into their hands.
Now, while we are talking about money, I want to get your thoughts on the ICPC's Nigeria Corruption Index, which ranks the judiciary top ahead of the legislature, the executive, and private business in terms of corruption. The ICPC said cases of outright demand and offer of bribes were mostly linked to election petitions. Now, you're one of the country's foremost legal experts on election petition. Is this the reality?
I must be very careful on what I say. I've never firsthand experienced these things, and that's the truth. And anybody who knows me know what I stand for. People say it. Even when people tell you some of these things, and you say, okay, are you ready to go out there and say, no, we don't want that. Get my point? Now, and I've told the politicians that they have the tendency to corrupt every system. Not all the judges we are not equally endowed. Let me just put it that way. And we are not equally gifted to resist temptation. We are talking now about payments, about salaries. If a judge, the year is running to an end now, he doesn't know where he will get money to buy turkey and rice for his family. And he doesn't have the kind of moral fiber that will make him to say, look, even I would rather die in poverty. If something comes his way, no matter how unwholesome, he may be tempted. I'm not making excuses for people who are corrupt, because you have no business to be corrupt, because you have the choice. Nobody forces anybody to take the position of a judge, the job of a judge. But even having said that, we must appeal to our political elites I've said this severally elsewhere. Most of the members of the political elite believe that judgment can be bought, that justice can be compromised. That frame of mind must stop. It must stop. Because if you don't stop it, you still turn around to blame the same judiciary. Well, with respect to ICPC, I doubt it if you can say the judiciary is the most corrupt public institution in our country. We have other institutions whose corruption stare you right in the face. If you talk about the judiciary, what do you say about security agencies? What do you say about issues at the borders? What do you say about the issues at our airports and seaports? Are you getting my point? So, for me, I'm not saying the judiciary is 100% made up of angels. No, but we should look at that institution and put everything in perspective. I will not support anybody who sits in judgment over others to be corrupt. In fact, my position, which I've held consistently, is that if somebody is corrupt and is on the bench, I've advocated before that anybody who is properly tried for corruption should actually be killed. But it's becoming unpopular. So I've modified that position to say, look, if you are found to be corrupt, at least people should go in for life imprisonment. We should make examples of people so that others will know it's not the proper route to take to make money. And saying this too, we must warn ourselves. Lawyers must also be careful. We should not be conduit pipe for the passage of things that are not right. No, you see, because we live in this society. I've had cases, when I sat on the LPDC, we've had cases of lawyers pretending that they were giving money to judges, which will not even be true. So sometimes people use the name of judges to do some of these unwholesome things, and the judges will be totally unaware that their names were being peddled for such things.
Let's round off with the fact that there was a fetch script recently in your honor to mark 2 decades of forensic advocacy at the inner bar. And the CJN at that event made what I consider to be a telling comment on the judiciary. He marveled at the amount of effort you put in your cases and the quality of briefs that you file before the courts. Now, what can the young lawyers learn from this?
When I became a lawyer, my first objective was, look, I don't just want to be another lawyer. I want to distinguish myself in any way possible, legally, professionally. And when I became SAN in 1987, I told myself that it's like being born again, to use the cliche of Christian brethren. And I said, I want to justify the confidence of those who invested their faith in me, in appointing me as a senior advocate of Nigeria. Having said that, I think there's a lot to say about the pupillage. It's very important. I've said this often and often. I served pupillage technically for 11 years before I branched out. Your best bet is that you should not be a guinea pig for yourself professionally. Others should be guinea pigs, and you look at their mistakes and make corrections. Once you learn from your own mistakes, it's a problem. Number 2, get quick rich syndrome. If you want to be in litigation in Nigeria, money should not be your primary focus. You must be ready to pay your dues. For people to invest their money in you, your reputation must be very high and huge. Number 3 is that law is knowledge-based. You can't but continue to read and read and read. And I tell people, to be a good lawyer, you can just read law reports and law books alone. But if you want to be a great lawyer, you must know more than law.
Welcome back. Lawyers have been assessing the performance of the judiciary, and we have a few views up next.
Well, it hasn't fared very well. There's been virtual paralysis across various levels of government, even those that were not torched by rioters, to make progress in the administration of justice, the delivery of justice to the people. I was recently pleased to see the task force set up by the President of the Court of Appeal, Justice Dongba Mensem, which is to deal with an intolerable backlog of appeals in the Court of Appeal in Lagos. And my immediate response to it was that, thank God for a President of the Court of Appeal who wants to work, who has diligence and integrity at the background of her consciousness, and to express the view that it's a miracle in the present circumstances that a judge of vision and dignity has reached that office. And I know that there were difficulties before she did. But the fact is that you can tell from who leads the judiciary what they will do. So I generally expect that many of our judiciaries will be headed by people who do not wish to work, who wish to glory in the robes and the fancy and the cars and the idle honorifics, rather than to do real work. It seems to me that the President of the Court of Appeal wants to leave a legacy of work done. The job of judges is to decide disputes promptly, efficiently, effectively, and that's what she's trying to do. So that's an outlier. In some states, Borno State, for example, the chief judge there seems to be infused with this vision for a modern judicial delivery system. And this is a war-torn area of the country. But the steps he's taken with the use of technology and the changing of the vision of his judges as to justice delivery is one that we can say is commendable. So there are spots, and yeah, there are a few. And what it shows is that we're capable of achieving a high result if we have the leadership that is required. In the places where there has been no progress, despite the availability of easily affordable technology, this is a failure of the heads of those courts.
We have a fundamentally flawed system. What do I mean? You have a system where the Chief Justice of the court, the Chief Judge as it were, for State High Court, is the head of that court. At the same time, that court is under the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice also technically is the litigant before that same court. And so when you begin to look at this conflict, it becomes very difficult for the court to be properly managed. And this pandemic has brought this to the fore. The moment the governor issues a directive, the court goes into a halt because he says level 14 downwards don't come to work. And then all the staff of the judiciary and the court, as it were, we have to stay at home. But if we had a system where the court functions independent, the court can come out with strategies, holistic strategies that will allow the court to still work. I mean, the way the court is arranged, the magistrate or the judge sits so far from the litigant or the bar. And so to that extent, we could always fashion out a mode that will be suitable for court sessions to still go on and the judiciary to be able to still deliver, on its core. But unfortunately, the judiciary, the court system is tied to the apron of the ministry. So how does that function? Then the head of the court, which is the chief judge, is not an administrator per se, in my view. We need a court administrator, so-called, and the head of the court in terms of administration should have been the chief registrar. But the chief registrar most of the time is also subservient to the chief judge of the court. So these are issues that will not allow administration of justice to flow seamlessly. So I believe that if we look into all these things, our court system can be structured in the way that we can file processes from our offices as lawyers, and then we do not need to go. Things can be stamped, payments can be made right from your offices. But unfortunately, these are the things we hear them say from the head of the court and from the administrative angles of the court. But they are, as to me, as best as lip services, because we don't get these things in reality. We don't see these things happen. You still have to take your processes to court. Manually. And so we need to look at alternative, and the alternative has to be holistic.
And on the home stretch, we bring you a recap of the top court stories and some of the major activities from the judicial panels probing police brutality across the country.
We begin with a report that the Lagos State Judicial Panel on Restitution for Victims of SARS and other related matters has held its last sit-in for the year.
JP 145/2020.
At that last sit-in on Tuesday, December the 22nd, the panel heard about 16 cases it listed for hearing. One of the highlights of the sit-in is a petition of late Kolade Johnson, who was allegedly shot by a SARS officer in March 2019 after intervening in the alleged assault of one Ismail.
A man came down from the bus, putting on a black polo, written at the back, SARS.
The witness says he still nurses a fear of the police many months after the incident. After adjourning all petitions to next year, the chairman of the panel, Justice Doris Okowobi, thanked everyone for their support. In Edo State, the Judicial Panel of Inquiry for Victims of SARS and related abuses rose from its last sit-in after adjourning the petition of one Mrs. Okungbowa Momodu against Mrs. Caroline Afegbai till January the 6th, 2021. The panel adjourned for its review after the petitioner closed its case. The panel also heard further evidence in the petition of members of one Okundai family against the police.
There was a case we were investigating.
At its previous sit-in, it had summoned the head of the anti-kidnap unit, CSP Richard Balogun and CSP Tokwe Oparinde, to appear before it to tell their side of the story. At the courts, Justice Toyin Oyeko Abdullahi of the Lagos High Court has granted permission to Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu to relocate the State High Court in Igbosere to an exclusive residential area in Ikoyi. Justice Oyeko Abdullahi granted a motion experte brought by the government seeking to restrain a group of persons trying to prevent it from taking full control of a property at Osborne Foreshore Estate in the Ikoyi area. The property has been a subject of litigation at the Federal High Court for a while. The defendants in the suit are the Incorporated Trustees of Osborne Resident Association, Sir Steve Amajafo and Mrs. Chinwe Ezenwalba. With the Lagos State government getting the permission to relocate the court, government is to take full right of the property, including but not limited to access to renovation, conversion and use of the property otherwise restrained by the Federal High Court. The Lagos High Court Igbosere complex on Lagos Island houses several courtrooms which were set on fire and completely destroyed by hoodlums during the EndSARS protest in Lagos. And we round off with the reports that the trial of a former chairman of the defunct Pension Reform Task Team, Mr. Abdurrashid Maina, continued in Abuja, with the trial judge ordering the embattled former pension boss to open his defense. Lawyer to Mr. Maina, however, asked for an adjournment on the grounds that he is unable to proceed with his no-case submission due to his inability to access the certified true copy of the court's record of proceedings. The application for adjournment was opposed by the prosecutor, who insists that it was a ploy to stall the trial. After listening to both parties, Justice Okunabang foreclosed the right of Mr. Maina's counsel to present a no-case submission, as he ordered the defendant to open his defense on the next adjourned date of January the 26th and 27th, 2021.
And it's on this note that we adjourn till next week. Don't forget that you can watch again this episode of the program and past episodes on our YouTube page. I am Shola Shieli. Thank you for watching.